Good morning. This is Chapter 3, The Genes of Gregoria. This letter is dated May 1st, 1988. Dear Cousin David, I write to you on this holiday because it's a day that I always think about family and about history. Nadine and I have not missed a May Day parade since our first child was born on this very day. That is the only time we did not get to go to the Kremlin to meet friends and celebrate this great day in our history. I have made arrangements to phone you. I will try to make the call at 2 p.m. your time on May 14th. I want to ask you if I have your permission to share your letters with my students. History and economics are very closely related. I cannot understand the workings of economics without the knowledge of history. I have spoken to others on the faculty and to some of the students about our exchanges, and they are all asking me to let them read your letters. Now, to answer your question, do I think that the letters are too personal? No, I do not. You have led me in the direction that I want to go. I shall follow with a very personal letter that was not written by me. I only typed it. When I read your letter over the telephone to Luba, she became very emotional. The part about your grandparents and the rabbis made her laugh. She made jokes about your grandfather marrying Natasha. She reminded me of how much we both enjoyed going into our grandparents' room on the rare occasions when they were both away. Oh, it was such an enchanting place. Natasha had shimmering icons on the wall. They were religious paintings in beautiful colors, covered with a rippled glass. There was a huge silver cross on the wall above the bed, and on the night table sat a silver samovar with a gold cross on it. You could easily tell which side of the bed my grandfather slept on, because his side there was a family picture that included a picture of your father. When I was about 11, my grandmother stopped going to church, not because my grandfather would not let her, but because she was caught in a crossfire. Her friends felt uncomfortable with a woman who lived in a house full of Jews. As a boy, I could never understand all of this, and I too asked my mother the direct question of, what is a Jew, and am I one? She answered with a smile, it all depends on who you ask. If the rabbi asks you, you say no. But if Moskowitz, the baker, asked you, you say yes. I remember how she and my father both laughed, but I did not see the humor, and I went to my bed to think it over. My father finally came into my room and tried to explain my mother's answer. You see, to some Jewish means religion, and we are not religious Jews. We are not religious anything, he added. Then he said, your mother was born of Jewish parents, and that makes you a Jew. What has Moskowitz got to do with it, I asked. His answer was the definition that I have always clung to. Moskowitz, he explained, is a Jew like your mother. Just as the Soviet Union is made up of many different languages and cultures, so are there different types of Jews. We are non-religious Russian Jews. That is to say, you are. I am not. My mother was not a Jew. To tell you the truth, David, it took me years before I understood what he was trying to say. I think that my sister Luba had more of a problem with it than I did. Natasha was always careful about not leaving Luba alone in Pinsk. She warned her repeatedly about scheming Jew boys who want nothing more from you than your dowry. I can remember her explaining to both of us that when we marry, our children would not be Jews. My parents, of course, never heard of any of these lectures, and we were always too embarrassed to tell them about it. To Natasha, we had the equivalent of a hereditary disease, and Moskowitz, the baker, used to joke about it. Luba often worked for him, especially around the holidays when he made the fancy breads, and he always sent something very special home with her, just for Natasha. The baker was a party member who was trying to assimilate his Jewish friends into a Marxist society. He was also a Yiddish historian who spent many hours over his books and with his writings. The Nazis burned them all. Oh, David, what have we started here? I told you that this letter was written for me. It is, in fact, Luba's letter. She calls me almost every day now. She just called again to see if I had mailed it yet. One day she may call and tell me that she has more to add. Then she will call back and say that she does not want the story told, and that I should destroy the letter. As I was reading your last letter to her on the phone, I picked up a strange echo in her responses. She tried to be her usual pleasant self, but we are very close, and I knew that there was something wrong. She tried to make jokes about your grandfather and Natasha, but her laughter was forced. I asked her if she wanted to contribute anything, and then I added that I felt compelled to write something about the war. I said that I didn't know if I could do it or not, but that I would try. At first, Luba did not respond at all. Then I detected a few squeaking sounds, and I knew that she was fighting back tears. I did not want an explanation over the telephone. I told her not to bother to try and tell me what was wrong. I looked at the clock and told her that there was still time for me to catch the afternoon flight to Minsk. Luba met me at the Neiman restaurant on Lenin Prospect. We had a very quiet meal. I knew that she had something very serious on her mind, and I would let her tell me what it was when she was ready to do so. She left her car at the restaurant parking area, and we walked down Lenin Prospect to the house in which houses the Social Democrat Workers' Party, which held their famous meetings back in 1905. It is the same house in which our father's political ideas were born. Today, that house is a museum. We walked across the bridge to the other side of the Svilosh River and sat down on a bench that overlooked the water. Silently, we watched the fishermen until Luba's breathing became very rapid, and suddenly, with tears spilling down her cheeks, she turned to me and said, "I would embarrass you and your children and your grandchildren." I put my arms around her. "My dearest Luba, they all love you so. There is nothing that you could do or say that would diminish that love. I worry only that what I say will bring you pain. I do not want you to have any more pain. It is for you to decide." "Sasha," she said, "I am so afraid of what you will think." "Luba, we were sheltered children. I was a very young 17, and you were a very young 21. I have always thought of the war as a time that the entire population was under an anesthetic. We hallucinated that nightmare. When the surgery was finished, the Soviet Union had been welded. What we did in those years under the anesthetic was not real. Can I tell my cousin in America that I helped to kill over 50 men before I had reached the age of 20? I can see, my sister, that you are shocked. It began as a game that my friend Sergius and I used to play. When Papa heard about it, he went into a rage. 'We are soldiers, not body counters,' he growled at us. By then we were close to 50. Sergius had counted them. It included the trains and the trucks that we blew up, but many came from the end of our special sniper rifles. We were often placed at strategic points, and the fascists were drawn in past us. Many times we would get them as they were running away." Luba put her hand on my arm. "I am not shocked, dearest Sasha, although you have never spoken about it. I have often heard our father tell others what a great soldier you were, and I have seen all of your medals." She threw her arms around me with such force that she almost pushed me off the bench. I felt her warm tears on my cheek. "That is what made it so difficult for Mama and me. We were always afraid that you and Papa would find out," she said. "Luba, you are my precious sister, who took care of me when I was a child. Do me the honor of letting me hear what is troubling you, so that I can tell you again that nothing that you can have ever done can tarnish our relationship." A bus heading back across the bridge stopped for a passenger, and Luba pulled me by the hand toward the bus. I had never seen my sister out of control before. I remember when she announced her engagement to her handsome flyer, Valide. She was the most calm person in the family. We rode in silence to Svoboda Square and sat on another bench in front of the Museum of the Great Patriotic War. "In there," Luba said, dabbing her eyes with her handkerchief, "you can see the medals and the uniforms of Nikolaya, our father. And out here sits his daughter, who wept over the dead body of a Nazi captain." The faucet had been turned on, and I waited patiently for the story to flow. She managed a weak smile as she began. "I am an old woman now, and I promised our mother that I would never tell anyone, but perhaps there is a purpose to be served now. In your exchange of letters with our cousin David, this may help to push aside the political mystique and let us stand together as a family. He wants to know his family, so let us show him blemishes and all. Let him see us as human beings. and not as the distant Soviets. When Papa took you away that day in 1941, Mama and I were getting ready to close up the house. We were packing things and planning my wedding at the same time. We were making a list of the things that we would buy in Minsk. Gregoria was instructing the help what had to be done in the next 2 weeks before he got back. I remember the boy telling him not to worry, that he would take good care of the pigs and feed them every day, on time. We planned to leave in 2 days. She paused to smile up at me. Even if we did, the Panzers might have beat us to Minsk. They were in our barn and in our house in 2 days. They were killing machines. I remember some women in the camp from Pinsk telling me how the Nazis seemed to kill for the sheer joy of it. There are no words to describe the horror and shock that Mama and I felt. We had fallen off a mountain. I don't remember when it happened. We went from planning my wedding to viewing the carnage in the same moment. The first Panzer troops that pushed through our village were the best of the lot. That is to say, that they were the better grade of manure. They commandeered all of our property and everything on it. They moved officers' things into our house and made Mama and me cook their food, wash their clothes, and make their beds. Gregoria kept saying, "Don't worry, the Red Army will counterattack soon, and we will be rid of this vermin." Each day he expected the counterattack. It came, but long years later. The Nazis were everywhere. At first they were sleeping in the barn and all over the house, even in the milk house. I was so afraid of them that when Mama sent me to go get milk, I refused. When she said she would go herself instead, I grabbed the pail and went. Just a few steps from the milk house, a sergeant grabbed me by the arm and started to pull me toward the orchard. Mama was watching and screamed. An officer ran out and shouted at the soldier, whom they put into a truck and took away. I started to think that maybe it wasn't going to be so bad. Maybe Grandpa was right. Perhaps we could put up with this until the Red Army comes back. When I got back to the house with the milk, the officer was speaking to Gregoria in Polish, but the officer's face was getting red because Grandpa would only answer in Russian. Mama spoke to Gregoria in Polish and made him answer the officer in a language that they would all understand easily. The officer only wanted to talk to Gregoria and not to women. He sent us both into the pantry. From there we could hear Grandpa telling the officer that we were not Bolsheviks, but landowners, and that the officer's troops were welcome to rest on his farm. Mama was nodding her head, yes, yes, as if she approved of what Gregoria was saying. She whispered that Nikolai was so wise. When he took all of his papers and things, including the picture of Lenin, it had saved our lives. The Panzer unit stayed for only 2 days and then moved on. It was very quiet after they left. Mama kept screaming at Grandpa to stay in the house, but he insisted on walking around and trying to figure out a safe way for us to go north and to join you and Papa. He kept saying that if we could find the Red Army, he would join. He was a 72-year-old man. Poor Gregoria. He was beside himself. He wanted so much to get Mama and me out of there, and he was helpless to do anything. The third night, we were all sitting in the kitchen when we heard noises out in the barn. The Nazis had taken all of the help away in their trucks, including that poor boy who was supposed to feed Gregoria's pigs. Mama told Grandpa not to go out again, but he insisted on seeing who was in the barn. He found Moskowitz, the baker, and 2 of his friends who had slipped away from the interrogation center and made their way to the farm. They wanted to sleep for a while and then leave before daylight to hide in the woods, in the marsh. The savages will never find us there, the baker said. He pleaded with us to get all the food and things that we could carry and go with him, because he said that the Nazi had collaborators who would tell them that we were Jews and that they would murder us. It was the first time I had heard the word Untermensch. Moskowitz had his fist clenched, and he was shaking all over when he told us what it meant. The Bolsheviks with the Jewish heads, the subhumans. I was trembling with fear, but Grandpa kept telling me not to be afraid, that the troops were gone and that they were finished with us. Gregoria had spent his whole life hunting and fishing in the marsh and in the woods. How many stories have we heard about the wolves, the elk, and the huge fish? I kept thinking that with him we could survive. We could survive it out there, and perhaps we would be better to go. Mama and I both wanted to. Oh, how I wish that we had. I would much rather have died in the marsh. She paused and took a deep breath to keep from losing control before she continued. Gregoria convinced us that the Red Army would be back soon, and that they would need us on the farm. He convinced us that we were safe. If not, we would have been taken with the others, he said. It was what he wanted to believe, so we did. Poor Grandpa. He could have survived in the woods. We gave Moskowitz and his friends some food that the Nazis left and some other things, and we went to bed. Of course, I could not sleep. Like Grandpa, I kept thinking that there must be a way to get to you and Papa. Toward morning, I dozed off, and when I awoke, it was dawn. The spring mist was coming across the Pirapat and rolling around in the marsh like it was playing its favorite game before it touched the water of the Steer River and moved towards the farm. I began to cry because I remembered the last time that I was up that early. I had made breakfast for you and Papa and Gregoria when you were going fishing, and I watched the three of you walking across the fields and disappear into the fog. When I cleared my eyes, I could see the trucks growing out of the mist on the road. Those big, noisy, ugly trucks bringing the SS Eisengruppen and their repulsive Belarusian collaborators. There were 2 trucks for the Nazis and 1 for the dogs, as Mama used to call them. I smiled and took her hand. That's what Papi called them also, the Nazi pointer dogs. Yes, she said, and she kissed my cheek. Sasha, if you stop me once more, I do not think I will be able to continue. I promise that I will not. She stared at the museum for a few moments before continuing. They made the 3 of us stand in the kitchen while they searched the home. I could hear Mama whispering her thanks again to Nikolaya for packing all those things in the truck and sending them on ahead of him. He was such a wise man. The Nazis found nothing. But I kept hearing the words of Moskowitz and the words of endearment that Mama had said to him in Yiddish when we were leaving the barn. I was convinced that the collaborators had told the Nazis that we were Jews. I stared into the faces of the dogs to see if any were from our area, but I did not recognize any of them. They put Grandpa in one truck and Mama and me in another. I was sure that that meant that we, the Jews, would be killed, like Moskowitz had said, and that Grandpa probably would be taken to a work camp. Poor, wonderful old Gregoria. The last sight of him that we had was those damn dogs pushing him into the truck. We never saw him again. They took us to an interrogation center that they had set up in your old school. The frozen faces that came in and went out shall haunt me forever. Sasha, I know that you have seen many frozen bodies in the snow. Well, that's what they were, only their feet moved. When I saw someone that I knew, I would try to smile, but no one smiled back. The large field on the side of the church where Father Goronowski kept the cows were full of Soviet soldiers. Nazis were still putting more barbed wire around the field. Between the field and the school, lines of trucks waited for their cargo in some of the interrogation centers. Some went to work camps in Poland, and some as far away as Germany. Others to concentration camps, and the rest went to the killing pits with the dogs. Mama and I had to stand for a long time. Before a Nazi took my arm and led me into a room. I was so terrified that I could barely walk. I had to keep my legs together because I was afraid that I might act wet like a baby. I told him exactly what Gregoria told me in the kitchen, almost word for word. It was what Mama told me to do. I could hardly breathe. I started to sob. I couldn't help it. I thought about Mama and what they were going to do to her. The SS officer laughed and came around his desk. He touched my hair. Oh, again, Luba paused for control. David, I was breathless as I waited for her to continue. Oh, Sasha, Mama and I spent so much time fussing about my hair for the wedding. Well, the officer said something in German that I did not understand, but the others in the room all laughed. Then he told me in Polish not to worry, that I would be all right. Before I could say anything, they took my arm again and led me out of the building. I was helped into a truck. I was still numb with fear, and I could barely climb in. Nazis were willing to help me as they put their hands all over me. when I was once inside the truck to keep them from closing the flaps. Once I was inside the truck, I tried to keep them from closing the flaps. At that moment, the truck next to ours started to move forward. It was so full that 2 men fell out of the back. When they scrambled to their feet, they started to run. I don't know if they were trying to escape or to catch up to the truck, but both were shot right in front of me. I fainted, and when I could focus my eyes, there was my mother's face. She was holding me in her arms and rocking me like a little baby. We were both crying. And you know how when Mama wanted to get real affectionate, she slipped into her Yiddish. She was singing that Yiddish song about the baby who wouldn't go to sleep. She was singing it so softly that the only words I could make out was Kipela. When the truck stopped, we both instinctively clung to each other. We were the only ones in the truck now, just Mama and me. They opened the flaps, and I could see that we were back on the farm. Mama couldn't believe me. She wouldn't even get up. She pulled me back with her, and I suppose at that moment she knew what was going to happen, because in stern Russian she said, "No matter what, we must survive." Sasha said Papa is alive, and we must stay alive. Do what they want you to do, but survive. I started to giggle and cry and hug her. The soldiers had to pry us apart and pull me from the truck. There were Nazi vehicles everywhere. Motorcycles, armored cars, and trucks were parked from the gate to the front of the house. All the fences had been knocked down, and I remember thinking, the pigs will get out. But the pigs and all the other animals were long gone. They had taken everything. Later I learned that at first they intended to leave the farm intact and use it to feed their army. They needed the farm, just as Gregoria had said that they would. It was the biggest and the best farm in the area, other than the collectives to the north. I think that they wanted Gregoria to continue working it for them, and he had refused. So they killed him. They seemed unable to think. Their own fanatical fervor blocked their minds, and all that they could think of was the killing. In their stupidity, killing became more important than food, especially the dogs, who had that insane obsession with killing Jews. As bad as the Nazis were, I always felt safer with them than I did with the dogs. When I saw that red, white, red insignia with the double cross, it made my skin crawl. Where did they find all these crazy people? The barn had been cleared out, and all the tools had been dumped in a pile next to the door. Guns had been mounted on the top of the barn, and a machine gun unit was stationed on top of the hill, next to the road to Lunanek. There was also a machine gun where the gate used to be. It wasn't hard to tell that they planned to stay for a while. Our farm had become an Eisengruppen, a command post. We were District 5. The soldiers stationed there were specially trained SS troops who were assigned to organize the peasants in the area to perform anti-Soviet activities. Sasha, it is frightening even now to think about how easily they turned friend against friend. Survival was the key word on so many minds, but the Hitlerites were brain dead. Their own arrogant, beastly actions made even the most anti-Semitic peasants, those who wanted the church put back in charge of their lives, those who hated collectives and socialism, they learned to hate the Nazis much more. For months, Mama and I did the cleaning and the cooking for the officers who lived in the house. The captain in charge stayed in Grandpa's room, and a lieutenant in Mama and Papa's room. Mama and I stayed in the pantry. That is when they let us. That is all that I wanted to say about that. Each morning, I would look at Mama, and she would look away, and we would both know. Mama would see my tears well up, and she would always say the same thing. We are alive. For 2 Jewish women, that is a miracle. Sasha and Papa are alive. We must stay alive. I soon learned that Nazi indoctrination and organizing the local peasants to produce food for them was just part of the job for the SS here. The 5th District was also assigned to protect the road from Brest to the rail lines to Minsk. There were 3 other units like ours. They were stationed in Kobrin, Sjonem, and at Baradovichi. Each day they would go into the marsh and into the woods looking for partisans who were planting mines on the roads. They tortured or hung anyone who they suspected of helping the partisans. Every day Mama and I would whisper about you and Papa and what we thought you were doing and where you might be. I dreamed all the time that you were coming for us, or the Moskowitz people hiding in the woods would rescue us. One day, towards the middle of October, I was out in the orchard to see if the Nazi soldiers had missed an apple or two, when I heard someone call my name. I knew right away who it was, because he called me Luba Sweetface. It was Moskowitz. He was lying in the tall grass, and he told me that there were many hiding in the swamp and in the woods, but food was very scarce, and the nights were getting very cold. I could hardly see him. I had to keep looking in the trees. The rains had come, and he said that there was much sickness in his group. He asked if I could get any supplies or food. Sasha, I was so excited because someone that I knew was alive. But I also knew that things had to be very bad to make him come here in the daylight just to steal some food. I think that there were others with him, but they stayed back in the brush behind the pine trees. I am sure that they did not expect the farm to be so heavily fortified. Moskowitz said that they were expecting some Red Army supplies to reach them soon, but that they were desperate now. I told him that the fascists guarded everything, but that I would try. I asked him if Mommy and I could go with him, and he said no. He told me that I looked well, and that all he had to offer me was death. I did find some apples, and I started to bring them over to him when a Nazi soldier came up the path. He saw the apples. He saw the apples and was going to take them from me. Sorry. I did find some apples, and I started to bring... I'm sorry, I have to take a break for 2 minutes. I'm sorry. Okay. I did find some apples, and I started to bring them over to him when a Nazi soldier came up the path. He saw the apples and was going to take them from me. I told him that I was getting them for the officers, and that I would scream and say that he had attacked me. The soldier smiled and said, 9-9, and he ran back down the hill. I left most of the apples for Moskowitz, and I started back towards the house. I heard him say that he would be back at the same time next Saturday. When I told Mama about it, neither one of us knew what day of the week it was. We found out that it was Saturday, so we had a whole week to plan. We saved everything, potato peels, a half a cabbage we still had in the garden, so we hid some of the vegetables and even bones. You know Mama, she could make a meal out of sawdust. She would say, oh, they can make soup out of this, or latkes out of that. The hardest thing was getting out to the back of the orchard without being seen. I remember telling Mama the best thing would be for me to take as much as I could and go with Moskowitz. Mama held my arm so tight that it left marks on me, and she told me not to even... I'm sorry. I remember telling Mama the best thing for me would be to take as much as I could and go with Moskowitz. Mama held my arm so tight that it left marks, and she told me to not even think about it. She had been taken into Pinsk the day before to get some cloth from the warehouse. She was making the captain a new coat with a faux fur collar, with a fox fur collar. He had his own driver take her into town. Mama started to cry when she told me that she saw corpses everywhere. The field next to the church was still full of Soviet soldiers, but they looked like they had not been fed since the day we left. They were, she said, the walking dead. She made me promise to stay. I suppose that she thought that she could protect me somehow, but she could not protect me from the captain, who took me to his room that night. After seeing poor Moskowitz and hearing Mama tell me about the corpses and the walking dead, I decided that I would do something. I had fantasies about you and Papa and Valerie. all hearing about what I had done, and then you would all forgive me for David. By now, I was sorry that I had let her go on. I could no longer hold back my own tears, and we both waited until we could look at each other and hugged each other. I told her that it was not necessary for her to continue, but she said, "I have held this in all these years, and now I have gone this far. You might as well hear the rest of it." I planned to kill the captain that night. He always put his gun belt on the chair, and I began to plan how I would use the gun. I remember that night. He was talking to me, but I wasn't listening. I was thinking about how I could do it, and even get away to Moskowitz. The adjutant banged on the door just as the captain was getting into the bed, and he swore at him and told him to go away. But the man said that the matter was very important, so the captain got up and went to the door. I could hear what they were saying, even though they spoke German. You know it isn't that much different from Yiddish. He told the captain that the Nazi-appointed mayor of Minsk had informed the SS Central Command that racial undesirables had escaped and were being helped by the partisans. He said that there was an escape route through our area, and that the command wanted a unit sent out right away. The captain told him to get command on the radio and that he would be right out. As he put his clothes on, he was swearing and telling me how much he hated the Belarusian collaborators who thought only of killing Jews. "I have a war to fight," he said through his clenched teeth. As soon as he left the room, I took his gun. I didn't even know how to use it. I got dressed and I listened at the door. I heard the captain shouting that he didn't have enough men to risk sending any of them out at night, and that he had arranged a commander's meeting of the 3 units on the farm, and that he had planned a major sweep of the entire area in just 2 days. I put the gun back in immediately, knowing that I had to do something much more important. The next day was Saturday, and if I could manage to get that information to Moskowitz, I might be able to save some lives. I began to feel alive again. We set up a system. When I had special information, I would leave a milk pail on top of the milk house. They could see it from the pine trees, and they would send someone into the orchard. There were times that we learned about an overnight sweep or a troop movement, and I had no one to give the information to. As I said, Mama and I learned how to save what others threw away. We even managed a few precious blankets and some shoes. Sasha, I could not keep track of time. The summer came and went, and the winter seemed to last for years. It was maddening at times. Everything was so uncoordinated. I might have important information, but no one came to get it. They couldn't come when there was fresh snow because it would be too easy to track in the snow. Sometimes they would not come at all, and if I left things that were not picked up and were found by the Nazis, I would be shot. It was a terrifying system, but I didn't know how to improve it. Each day I watched the soldiers coming back, sometimes bringing dead or wounded. That's how we managed to get some shoes and blankets. Soldiers came and went, but the officers stayed. One day, early in the spring, I left a note that the other Eisengruben officers were going to have an important strategy meeting at the farm. The partisans were killing too many SS soldiers. I left the information and I told them that the officers would have dinner first. I remember that Mama was just putting the food on the table when the partisans attacked. They burnt down the barn, killing many of the Nazis in it, and for a time they had the house surrounded. My heart was dancing. I never knew that there were so many of them. Mama and I were kept in the pantry, and we couldn't see what was going on. But we knew that it was very serious, because we heard the fascist radio for help. I heard the captain saying that it was the biggest raid by far, and I felt that I had been a part of it. I expected that they would find out who gave the information, but I was prepared to die. Both Mama and I had all that we could stand. Death was not something that we feared any longer. "Sasha, it was the biggest raid so far," the captain said, and I had been part of it. I was sure that Papa and everyone would know about it, and I felt so proud. Again, Luba had to stop and wait while we both dried our eyes. When she spoke again, her voice was wavering, but she did not look at me. The sad part is that the new troops arrived before the partisans could get away, and many were killed. The worst fighting took place right in the orchard where the captain led his men. Now, my dear Sasha, this is the part that I promised Mama that I would never tell anyone. Maybe I should not break that promise. Tell me only what you wish to tell me. So far, my love for you has only grown with every word. I was pregnant with the captain's child. They brought him from the orchard, mortally wounded. He asked to see me. He told me how much he loved me, and that he probably would be sent back to Germany to recover. But he said that he knew that he would come back for me. He kept promising that he would come back. I didn't want to, but I knew that he was about to die, so I told him that I was going to have his baby. Sasha, he seemed so happy. You know, at night he was almost human. He told me all about his father's farm, and how he hated the war, and how he hated the Belarusian dogs. He never let his men go near the killing fields. He left that to the dogs. He often swore in German, and then say to me in Polish, "How am I supposed to get the people to support us when these lunatics are still killing them?" Sometimes he would even cry at night and tell me about when we got back to live on his father's farm, that we could forget all about the war. I held him in my arms until he died. His last words were to the other officers, instructing them to take good care of me until he returned. Well, there I was, Sasha, weeping like he was my husband. After the raid, it was decided that the farm was no good anymore as a command post. They burned everything down and took Mama and me to the camp at Birosa. I remember turning around and watching the house burn. I kept thinking that this is just another stupid act by the barbarians. That beautiful house watched over the farm for a century. Great-grandpa and his father built the beginnings of it. It was a historic treasure. And the farm, not yet collectivized, was still a very productive farm. Mama would not turn around. I cannot describe what her hatred did to her. She was paralyzed with it. She no longer spoke of survival. She often asked me if I spoke to the captain again about Gregoria, but the captain always said the same thing. He would try and find out, but that he thought he was sent to a work camp in Germany. I knew that that was a lie. At the camp, Mama and I were not treated as badly as the others were. Of course, we were not in with the Jews. It seems that the coat that Mama made for the captain and the others that she made gave her a sort of celebrity status. She and I were given jobs as the camp tailors. Mama tried to keep my spirits up, but I felt so helpless in the camp. For months I felt that I was helping the partisans, and now I was with a group of ignorant women who didn't care if the Nazis won. They willingly did everything the fascists asked them to do, from the sex orgies to the back-breaking work. Of course, they too were too frightened to complain. That I could understand. But the Nazi promised them that when the war was won, the fascists would let them have their own state of Belarusia. They said that they would be free, that they would free the land of all the Jews and the Antichrist Bolsheviks. Can you imagine, Sasha? These monsters setting themselves up as the good Christians? They had God mit uns on their belt buckles. At least they didn't bother Mama and me anymore. One woman that was sewing with us was sent to the camp after they had killed her husband and burned her home. She never thought that they would do that to her husband because her husband was a pointer who was helping them identify the Jews who were trying to escape. She was from Beroja, and she said that after the big partisan raid on our farm and all 3 District Einsatzgruppen commanders were killed, the SS went to surrounding villages. Because they could not find out who gave the information to the partisans, they hung 5 people from each village. There were 5 villages. 25 Soviet citizens died, and I was here sewing uniforms. A few weeks after I was in the camp, I had a miscarriage. Mama took care of me. You know, Sasha, there were so many people at the camp who were always asking about their relatives. They always wanted to know if their children or their husbands were alive. And Mama and I, and you and Papa, were together. I used to feel so guilty, not just because of that, but because there were so many in the camp who were not as fortunate as we. They were slowly starving to death. They fed them what the army had left over, and it had very little nutritional value. At least Mama and I had enough to eat and to keep us alive. We tried to save some of our food and get it to the other sectors, but it was like trying to feed all the pigs at the farm with one acorn. So you see, Sasha, what some people accused me of was really true. I suppose the only thing that saved us was that no one from our district was alive that knew the truth. My dear cousin David, I don't have to tell you how I wept and how many times I kissed her cheek and told her that she had nothing to feel guilty about. I mentioned before that I killed many Nazis. Those that Sergius and I counted were just the ones that we were sure of. Many times we did not wait around to find out the results of the mines that we planted. I did give some thought to writing a book about it, but then I could never bring myself to do it. For what purpose? I would ask myself, for what purpose? The Soviet people know all about the war. Now I realize that my own children cannot really, truly know me unless they know what created my sister and I. She was always such a beautiful woman, and she still is. But she never married. Her flyer was killed early in the war, and she never established any long-term relationship with any man again. In one of our letters, you mentioned that you were reborn on that day of the bloody riot in New Jersey. Well, I was reborn the first time that I saw that gray uniformed body drop to the snow after receiving a bullet from my rifle. I went from sheltered childhood to adulthood, to death's door in an instant. And I was frozen there. Sasha Nikolaevich Truskoff, the adult, ate, slept, drank, and urinated in the snow, but he was not alive. There was no living things then. You could see a moose move through the woods or a horse on the road, and they all seemed to have that same dazed look. In some places, the very ground was littered with what at a distance might appear to be tree stumps, but when one got closer and refocused, you saw that they were half-buried corpses. Even the land, the scorched trees, the smoky villages were all part of the foggy graveyard that I lived in for those 3.5 long years. There is certain stimulation in such primitive living. You do not survive on the land, but actually in it. When the weather permitted, we dug caves, and like bears, returned to them in the winter. We ate what animals could hunt or steal. We ate what animals we could hunt or steal. I don't know if I could ever articulate what it was like to live like a ghost. We nourished ourselves on hate, raw hatred for the Nazis and for the dogs, and also on the undisguised open love we had for each other. We were one mind and one heart. We were closer than any family can be, for we depended on each other for our very existence every day. We had women in our unit, and of course I would be lying if I said that no one ever gave a thought to sex, but it would be incestuous, and we seldom had the time. David, perhaps all of this is just emotion, and I have lost my way. Perhaps we should just skip the war years. It would make Luba very happy. She is a well-known and very popular person in Minsk, and she has many friends her age that also survived the war, and I don't think that she is anxious for them to know her full story. Every Soviet our age has war stories to tell, but we never talk about it now. Are you sorry that we started this? Sometimes I do feel that way myself, but I think that we should go on. Do you? I close now with love from the entire family. Sincerely, Nasha Nikolaevich Truskoff. And I will see you the next time for Chapter 4. Thank you.